Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colada with Architecture Talk Tank. We're back again after a short break, and today my guest is Elisabeth Kubany. Very excited for this podcast. Specifically, we're going to talk about public relations for architects, and it's really the first time I'm covering this topic with Architecture Talk Tank. And yeah, it's really exciting for me to deep dive into it, especially with an expert. Elisabeth is running a studio called Kubany. You can find it under kubany.co. And essentially, it's a public relation company that helps architects with their communications and more. And so therefore, let's maybe give a chance for Elisabeth to introduce herself and we deep dive into more of the work. Elisabeth, thank you so much for accepting my invite to join today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a delight to be here, really, and to be talking to you. I've admired your work for a long time. And as you said, I have my own public relations agency called Kubany, technically Kubany LLC, but Kubany will do. My work is extremely focused on what I call visual culture, which is kind of a confluence of architecture, design, and art, but with a very heavy focus on architecture and place, I would say. That is my background. I studied architecture as an undergraduate at Columbia in university, and then received a master's degree in architectural history and theory from the Architectural Association in London, and kind of ended up in public relations. I really ended up in public relations by accident, but it was really a wonderful meeting of my interest in architecture and in the media, and writing and storytelling and those things that I sort of have been doing my whole life without necessarily realizing I was doing them.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And I love that when, you kind of move a little bit from the traditional path of architecture, but actually find your passion in a combination of media, in this case, and storytelling. So perhaps we can start from the basics. What is public relations? Because it seems to be somehow related to marketing and communications, but it has its own space in business. And it would be really great to understand the differences and also define it.
Yes, sure. And to be clear, I would say I really do call the services that I sell communication services. But that has also changed over the years, right? When I first started in this business, I really talked about it as public relations, which was creating a link between my clients and the media and trying to get their work published and their stories told in the media as it's been traditionally defined, right? Magazines, newspapers, broadcast media like television, radio, in those places, right? I don't need to tell you that the world has changed a lot. And certainly over the last 10 years, that change feels like it's just accelerated. But with the advent of social media, digital media, websites, all of those new forms of media that really didn't exist 15 years ago, we really have to rethink the way we talk about what we do and the way we really carry out the practice. And that is to say, it's no longer really enough to just pitch your clients to the media, right? Because if you're telling one story in the media, but your website tells a different story and your social media tells another story still, or doesn't tell a story at all, as the case sometimes is, then you're not going to be maximizing the impact of the work that you're doing. So I really see my role now as examining and kind of interrogating the entire communications ecosystem of my clients. And that really does encompass many things, right? It encompasses their websites, really, first and foremost, their social media, the ways that they're pitching the press and the stories that they're trying to tell through the press. The photography that they're using, right? That tells a story and expresses a point of view, the awards that they're submitting and the way that they're submitting them, even like looking at things like the way they're talking about themselves in their firm profile, the way they're talking about themselves in their bios, on and on and on, right? And speaking engagements, like how are all of those things adding up to a single unified story or series of stories? And that is to me kind of the chief way I talk about the work and the way I differentiate it. So it is really more than just strictly public relations, which I, again, would define as that work with the media, and really a kind of broader look, a more holistic view of communications as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think it's very important. So basically, if you work with practices, does it come from a top down to really revisit the main message and communication strategy, or does it mostly focus on projects and specifically communicating the given design in focus for the time?
It's really both end, but I do say, projects, when I talk about this with clients, um, there's a sort of a sense of projects always being very, very important, right? They are often the news hook to get you into the press, but we don't only want to be talking about the projects themselves. We want to be talking, in my mind, projects are a vehicle, right, for ideas about architecture and about the world that an architect or a designer wants to put out. And I think that's and there are many different ways of talking about a project, right? You can use a project to do a Q&A with the principal or the designer. You can use a project to try to get a critical review. You can use a project for so many different things, to try to get on the AD 100 list. You name it, right? There's all kinds of things you can do with it. And I think an effective communications plan does try to work at all of those different levels. But I never want a communications plan to only be about projects, right? Because it needs to be about something that feels bigger, and like a series of projects, a series of ideas, right? Is there an op-ed that we could be writing that could then lead to speaking engagements, that can be a blog post for LinkedIn, right? It's sort of like trying to just identify what all the vectors are within a set of within a firm, really, kind of its reason for being, and then the projects that it's doing and the people who are doing it. And if you think, I feel like when I think about it that way, it's almost like this kind of limitless expanse of possibility that I just get super excited by. And I think even I would even say that a firm that maybe doesn't have, I mean, if a firm came to me and they didn't have a few projects that were kind of nearing completion or opening, I would say to them quite honestly, like, I think this work might be about thinking about communications differently than just public relations. Like, it might be about helping you to get speaking engagements, to make connections for new business. It might be about, honing your social, making sure your website is telling the right story. Like, that is valuable, but from a press perspective, you do need to have some projects. Like, it needs to feel like some activity happening, right? For journalists to get excited, for the most part.
That makes so much sense. And I think also what I really loved that you said is sort of to really set a tone for what the company is about, right? So we might be talking about project or series of projects, but again, that reflects onto the characteristic of the designer and perhaps also values that are represented by those projects. So each company, I think, and we're talking about it more and more right now, how important it is to find your own niche or perhaps a message that sets you, up for difference, really, to be able to be differentiated from other architects. And I think that we really struggle with that if we don't find our own uniqueness, us as architects, and perhaps we're misunderstood by clients as to what exactly we can do for them. So it's really important to set that tone. And tell me a little bit as to, what are best practices in order to help set the best tone for a brand or a business in architecture?
I think in a way you sort of said it like that. The word differentiation is really so key, and I talk about this a lot with clients and potential clients. Like, part of the work, I think there is an aspect of architectural education that is a bit about conforming, right? And sort of talking in a certain way, writing in a certain way, thinking about problems in a certain way. And I'm always very interested by the people who are breaking out of that in whatever way they can, and or helping people break out of that in whatever way I can, right? And so there's a process, really, of sort of if somebody gives me a firm profile text, for example, that feels kind of rote, right? That feels like something I've read before. There's some language that you just feel like, you really do see all too often, right? And right now it's very much in vogue, and it has been for about 10 years, for architects to say, we don't have a style, we just do what the client wants. And I always say to them, no, right? That is not true, because if you gave 5 architects the same client with the same set of demands and desires and program, et cetera, you would get 5 different responses, at least, if not more, right? And so what is it about sort of seeing this through your eyes that we can communicate that will help to explain the way you approach something, and the way you think about an issue, and the kind of solution and the kind of process that you're going to take a client through? And that, to me, is a lot of where the interest in this work starts, right? And sort of trying to help with that. And clients come to me, I would say, with a whole range of goals. Sometimes, I have a client currently that is very interested in sort of kind of reframing the way she and her staff talk about the work, so it is more design forward. She's concerned that they are too much. They're thinking about themselves too much as sort of a service provider. I've worked, for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill for more than 20 years now, 23 years to be exact. And, that work is, just about kind of continuing to tell a story about innovation, design excellence, rigor, all of those things that are meaningful to that firm and have been for so many generations. There's kind of everything in between. I mean, years ago, I had an architect call me and say he wanted to win the Pritzker, and could I help him with that? And I mean, my answer was probably not. But I could try, but I can't make you any promises. So there's just a range, and then of course there are other clients who aren't architects, right? There's I work with the city of Columbus, Indiana, on their incredible architectural and design legacy, and how that's being reinvigorated and rethought every day, with the Rothko Chapel and others. But the point is really that for everyone, there's an act of very active listening that I have to do, and to try and an active listening that I hope will lead to understanding of what it is that makes you and your firm different from the guy down the hall. And that is really, that to me is where everything has to start and flow from, because that should then underscore everything that we're saying about, whatever, client ABC.
Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting. I think what would be a great thing to know is, how do you approach to define your difference? Is this you looking into what your passions are and what you're interested to work with? For example, if your passion is to sustainably contribute to the environment through building, would that be it? Mm-hmm. Or is it more related to design and design style or methodology, or perhaps again, like with Zaha Hadid, it's very much about the approach to the design. So how do you find your difference? How do you find your uniqueness?
Well, I think, I will just say how the way I do it with clients, and not let me be clear that not everyone struggles to say this, but very often they struggle to express it in writing. There's somehow like a fear of putting it out. So what I try to do is, when they say it to me, to capture it and to give it back to them, and in a way that makes them feel comfortable, so that we can then put it out into the world. But if there is difficulty expressing it, I do have a list of questions, right, that I can start with, right, to begin a process of kind of extracting from a person or a group of people what it is that they feel separates them. I will say, just to your point about design and kind of formal considerations, I would say that I am less and less, just as a person myself and as an agency that I run, interested in people whose work is really defined formally, or only formally, I should say, right? That people who are sort of producing the kind of work that we might like kind of look at and say that's a sort of formal gymnastics, like the kind of work that's like feels like it's made for Instagram or the pages of a magazine, to me is less interesting, right? I have become just increasingly more interested in the kind of work that tells stories that you can't necessarily see in a photograph. Right. And the challenge that lies therein of trying to express those stories through some combination of words and photographs and diagrams and data and whatever it is. But that is just where my own head is, and sort of, I think the kind of work that I feel is important and maybe making a difference in the world, right? Addressing social or economic or ecological issues in whatever way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's so important. And I think that's a lot of times, even though we are designers and we have our own approaches, it's so hard for us to actually really pinpoint who we are as a characteristic that really reflects onto the brand. And I think that sort of really speaks to what you're just saying, being able to discover it and help your client get there by being able to confront even their own truths that you say sometimes they don't really, when they hear it or voice it, it's not necessarily what wants to go on paper, but being able to reliterate it back to them really helps. And that process is extremely powerful. I must admit that I'm now rebranding the Disrupt Symposium brand, and I'm actually in that process. And when I stepped into it, it was very much that. Like I was, I had my ambitions and certainly my visions, but it was very hard to really pinpoint it for the graphic designers and the branding people, like what is fully the character of this brand, and you're finding that through that process. And so I think what's really important is to have that guidance, and I'm guessing that's really why you come in. And yeah, so that's absolutely amazing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about PR. Obviously, the way I see it is that it's a very intentional way to engage with a certain message, a certain subject, with also a certain audience, and it always has a goal in mind. So we don't just sort of publicize for the sake of getting the message out there about what we're doing, but usually we're also expecting for something to come back from that message, like a sort of action to be generated from it. And I think that a lot of times people don't understand that. Like it's kind of that moment of, oh, we just built, now let's just tell the world about this design. Maybe someone will acknowledge us and give us an award or something. But that part is less intentional than actually what comes into planning the work of public relations. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work? What goes into it and what sort of things you want to think about and what sort of objectives to set to create a successful campaign?
Absolutely. So I would start by saying that, when I start to work with a client, I ask them, right, about their near-term goals, their 5-year goals, their 10-year goals, even their 20-year goals. And I think, and it isn't to say that I'm not saying to them, I will get you there, but I will say to them, we want to use the press to help get you there, right? And the using the press strategically as a tool to get you pointed in the direction of those goals, to me is, again, like that, once you start to think about the work as a tool for that kind of ambition, to me, it's much, much more interesting. What I would say is there's obviously, I think, a huge range in what people say to me might be their goals. But I also will say, that the press the press is such a powerful tool, right? The kind of communication, let's say, that we're doing, the public facing communication is so interesting to me because you don't always know where it's going to land, right? You don't always know exactly what's going to come back to you. And it is not linear necessarily. It's almost rarely linear, in fact. The one time that I think really just one time in my career, I had someone call an architect. This is when I was working at Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer. So this was years ago in the late 90s. We had a house that Malcolm Holzman designed, published in Architectural Digest. And like the day the issue came out, he got a call from a client who said she wanted him to build her that same house on a different site, right? She wanted the same idea, but on a different site. And, that was just, it was very funny, right? And it was obviously not super practical, but I think he actually did get a job out of it. But it was also, it really was the one time where there was that extremely direct A to B linear connection between what we publish and what then occurred. But if we think about the press rather than being a kind of a linear business development tool, which it is not, right? Like, just to be frank, it is not that, but it is a very powerful business tool, and it is what it really is the most powerful vehicle for expressing ideas. So, and I'm saying the press, but it really is all, again, it's all of these communication platforms. Like, if you're going to do a social media post, not everyone has to have a profound caption, but you should periodically be writing a caption that really does express something deeper about what someone is seeing. Again, something that they may not be able to tell from the photos. And and if we think about the work in that way, and then again, it's like it really does. It takes on a meaning that it might not have otherwise, right? It is not just about pretty images. There are all kinds of misconceptions, right, about publicists. Let's be honest, right? I'm very aware of that, about the work that we do, about the way we do our work. I mean, I had someone once say to me, like, "You're a publicist, you just gossip all day." And I was like, no, no. And then they think, all it is going to parties, right? And, look, I'm sure there's a kind of a type of, person who's in a fashion publicist or whatever who does a lot of that. Like, it's a part of the job, certainly, being social, being out, meeting people, but it's far from the job, right? And so the job is, in my mind, so much more heady and interesting, and to be good at it, you have to sort of probe and have great relationships with people, which is the fun part, right? Occasionally, like, go to lunch with a journalist, right? Talk to them about what they have coming up, what are they thinking about, what ideas, how does that match up with the kinds of stories that I want to be telling? And that's really the fun piece.
Absolutely. And I think it's true. Like, I think that there's so much more that comes into it, because in a way, when you're responsible for words, especially in the context of public relations, it can have an essence of business development. I know for a fact, actually, because we at Disrupt, we hosted Finn McLeod, who's working also in the comms department in SOM. And he spoke about how the practice actually intentionally publicizes articles that are expert pieces on certain type of projects that they want to attract for their office. So basically, that's the sort of intentionality that I think is almost magic making, because it's really calling out for a certain manifestation in a real case scenario, in this case to attract a client and to attract your dream project. And that intentionality, I think it's extremely an intelligent way to put your intention forward, and to also say, yes, this is what I want to attract, and I'm actually the right candidate for it, because not only we have a research department that is responsible for it, but we've got excellent ideas, and we've built similarly big projects, to be able to execute that. And so it is actually an incredible tool, I think, for architecture practices to attract clients and attract the business that they're looking for. And so certainly far away from gossip, and much more related to growth, of the practice.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's so much more intense than that, right? And I say I say to people all the time that what are the ideas that are maybe kind of like stirring around in your mind that haven't come out yet, right? That might become a thought leadership piece, or an op-ed, or some other form of communication that expresses something beyond kind of your day-to-day mode, and that can lead you and point you in a direction that you want to be going. And that, again, like, that is there's almost nothing better for me than when that happens and when that becomes a reality. And I also find that those things have legs far beyond, right, some other forms of communication, right? Because they can take on a life of their own, as you said, until an actual project materializes.
Absolutely. So this is really interesting. You spoke about thought leadership. I wanted to ask you a little bit about it. Why is it important, actually, to lead with thought leadership? We speak about it more and more today, and there's so many different mediums that we can apply thought leadership into. It can be public talks, publishing books as well, interesting articles that are not only talking about the design, but also the methodology, the sort of design process that goes into decision making. Why is it important for people to perceive us from that angle as well? The why and what of a practice, not just the end design.
I think in a way, the short answer is that it's a very crowded marketplace, right? I think most marketplaces today are quite crowded. And I think if you think of thought leadership as a differentiation tool, then it's almost necessary and not optional. And whatever form specifically that takes for an individual practice, right? Sometimes it's about, a story on sustainability and specific research you're doing. Have you done a lot of work with mass timber, right? That could be a way of approaching it. Obviously, that's a topic that's in the zeitgeist. I worked on an op-ed recently that I think was incredibly interesting to me about infrastructure and a way of thinking about infrastructure. I think that there's just as a differentiation tool, it is in some ways the most powerful thing you can do, because you can get a lot. As I said, you can give the same project to 5 firms. You can give the same project to almost an infinite number of firms, and not necessarily know what you're going to get back, and that's fine, right? That's part of the process. But I think through thought leadership, to sort of express the way that you think about these issues, right, whatever they are, whether it's equity or sustainability or some kind of materiality, mass timber, right, whatever, that a typology, on and on and on, right? That is a way of saying to a potential client, or a potential new hire, that you are doing some work that is going beyond the actual project, and that might contribute to the project in a way that would be beneficial for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I love this. So to all the shy architects out there that are shying away from putting themselves forward and letting, their business be seen through their face, basically it's important to do so, right? And you can do it in a very professional manner, but it's important to lead with also with a sort of a human-centered objective, not just to create a brand based on your designs. And I think the old school way of marketing for architecture practices was far too focused on designs, and not enough on people. And yet all the celebrity architects made it in that space by actually putting themselves forward and adding that touch to the brand. So just to wrap up, tell us a little bit more about the agency, Kubany, and what are the ideal clients that you work with, and sort of how the process looks like to work with you.
I don't know if I even can define an ideal client. Sometimes it's something that you don't expect. I would say that I am really driven by the relationships that I have with clients. I tend not to like, personally, right, my agency, I tend not to like things that feel very transactional, where I'm hired for 4 or 6 months just to like help someone get out of a bind or whatever. Like I really do have very long-term relationships with many of my clients, and I'm very driven by the possibility of helping to move them in the direction they want to go over a series of years, not months. And that's, I find that very rewarding personally. And I find it a much more interesting way to work, right? Which is to say that, it's not, there's no chance. It's not as if I get to rest on my laurels. It's never like an annuity, right? Like I'm never guaranteed that it's going to last forever, but I love the idea that we continue to kind of challenge each other and to push forward and to push towards something that maybe we can't even see in the moment. And that really does inspire me. The process of working together, I think, when I start with a new client, particularly if it's someone that I really don't know that much about, I do a lot of research, like a lot of research, right? I'm finding and reading everything that I can about a client on my own, and then asking them for a lot of material, marketing materials and press materials and press releases and whatever it is they can send to me. And then and then we do a sort of a kickoff, right? Where I synthesize a lot of that information and begin with a series of questions, which I always send in advance, and try to say, like, these are the things that I'm noticing. I want to talk through, this series of questions, and I'm going to come up with a set of recommendations from that. And from that, we create a strategy, which is a kind of it's really a document that's very much about saying, like, I see you and I think I understand you, and I want your confirmation that I see you and I understand you. But it's also very much a living and breathing document that's going to continue to change, depending on new projects coming in, other changes, other issues. There's a fair amount of work that I do that I can't anticipate in advance, right? There's crisis communications that obviously arise that you don't foresee, which you just sort of have to be able to drop everything to help a client if they're in a bind with something. There's, if somebody says they want to write an op-ed, right, that's something that, we don't necessarily foresee that at the beginning, but we can start to work with them on that. But it is there's a bit of a deep dive on, not a bit, but there's a deep dive on our part into the sort of client's world, where they are, what they're doing, who they're working for. And from there, we carry that forward. And I would say that, I generally think that I'm pretty low maintenance, right, as a partner, to my clients, and that I try, especially once we're in a groove, I can really take things and kind of run with them. But in the beginning, there's a bit of work, right, to do, and it's not as if you don't hire someone to do PR and then so that you don't have to think about PR again, right? It doesn't work like that, right? If you hire someone to do PR, expect those first 6 months to be pretty intense, right? In terms of the things I may be asking for, the things that I may need, just making sure that we're acting and delivering information in a way that feels true to the client, that feels comfortable for them. We're the messenger, and I never want to feel like we're doing something that feels off brand for our clients. So we check right in the beginning. And then, as I say, the goal is to kind of get into a groove where we don't need as much approval, right? And where we know, right, this makes sense for this client. And that's really kind of the way it works. PR is very rarely a super quick fix for anything. Yes, we do try to always think about, like, what's some low hanging fruit, right, where we can get some results, right, for someone right away, so they can see what we can do. But the real work, I think, takes a little bit longer. I do try to price our services so that people can afford to keep us around for a while. It isn't like so obscenely expensive that it doesn't make sense. And really, I hope that answers your question. There's obviously a lot that I could talk about, but those are the broad strokes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it really gives a good view into basically what's important for you, and also how to start working with you. Mm-hmm. So I do really encourage anyone interested to go and check out kubany.co. That's a website, and that's how you can also get in touch with Elisabeth. And Elisabeth, thank you so much for joining me at Architecture Talk Time. It was a pleasure, and thank you for being the first person to talk about public relations.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and congratulations on all the great work you're doing. And I can't wait to do something else with you.
Thank you. Me
Thank
too.
You so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks as well for all the listeners, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.